It was the fall of 1989 in the quiet Canadian town of Miramichi, New Brunswick, the kind of place where doors stayed unlocked and waves traveled easily across long gravel driveways. Local law enforcement would joke that their arms got sore from returning every friendly hello, because that was the cadence of life there: slow, familiar, trusting. People didn't worry about who was at the door. People didn't worry about much at all. That season, the stillness ruptured. In a place that prided itself on safety, a shadow settled in, and the people of Miramichi found themselves living in fear of someone they could not see, a man they couldn't track or anticipate, a man who could be anywhere, at any time, directed at anyone. They spoke of him as the monster of the Miramichi. His violence had no rhythm, no mercy. One night a house would go up in flames. The next, a priest would be found. A community known for kindness barricaded itself against its own panic. Gun sales spiked. Windows were hammered shut. In a moment that marked the time, Halloween was canceled. For 7 months, the town turned into a place where even silence felt dangerous, a ghost town in its own right. He didn't just take lives, he stole peace, faith, and sleep from anyone who heard his name. Officers said he moved like smoke, sliding back into the woods before daylight and leaving nothing but dread behind. It was like we were chasing a ghost, an officer would later recall. But the ghost had a name. It is Alan Joseph Ledger. Before people called him a monster, before his face ran across front pages and his name lodged itself in headlines, he was just another child from a part of town that most people forgot existed. One of 4 children raised under a roof, crowded with poverty, resentment, and unspoken rules. He would become the man who would turn an entire province into a hunting ground. But first, he was a boy, watching from the dark edges of Chatham Head, learning the shape of fear before he ever learned how to manufacture it. They say monsters are born. In Miramichi, it seemed they were made. Alan Joseph Lear was born in 1948 in Chatham, New Brunswick, a small town strung along the Miramichi River where winters stretched long, work was hard to find, and the cold felt like it seeped into the wood of the houses themselves. His mother, Louise, was a single parent trying to raise 4 children in a place where there was never enough heat and never enough money. To survive, she rented out rooms to strangers. One of those men fathered Alan before leaving, and the absence carved a gap that never filled. There was no father figure, no stability, no dependable structure. He watched his mother bring men home and overheard what children should never have to process. For a young boy searching for order and identity, that confusion began to plant something dark, and it found space to grow. People remembered 2 versions of Alan from those early years. There were those who thought he was bright, imaginative, the kind of kid who could have become an artist with the right encouragement. And others remembered a boy whose temper ran ahead of him, who was violent and unpredictable, who got into too many fights and never seemed to smile. He wanted control even then. When the world made him feel small, he tried to seize back power in whatever ways he could. He shared a bedroom with his sister and would secretly watch her change. Teachers called him distracted, angry, detached. That hunger for control trailed him wherever he went. Then came the moment that etched itself into him. His older brother was struck and killed while crossing a bridge near their home. The grief clawed through the family. In that storm of pain, his mother turned on him and spit out words a child can't forget. "I wish it was you," instead. From then on, Alan Ledger carried a wound that didn't close. The world, to him, looked like something that owed him harm. As he edged into adolescence and beyond, he gained a local reputation as a thief, a bully, a small-time menace who targeted those he could overpower. He was small, but determined to present as strong. He lifted weights, put on muscle, forced people to see him as someone to avoid. He'd walk the streets of Chatham Head, bare-chested, body hard, eyes cold. Folks learned to look away. Psychologists would later say that his life fell into a cycle of humiliation and retaliation. Each act of cruelty became a way to insist he wasn't the weak, unwanted child he had been made to feel like. He developed an appetite for risk and for making others flinch. He broke into homes, sometimes while people slept. He'd move items, take small things, or leave something behind. It wasn't a hustle for cash. It was a message: I was here. He wanted his victims to feel powerless, the way he remembered feeling. With those choices, the boy from Chatham Head receded. The man who would terrorize Miramichi took shape. By his late 30s, Alan Ligier was a familiar name to the police. Officers saw him as volatile, bitter, and dangerous. Yet even people who had arrested him couldn't imagine how far he'd go. Petty theft and intimidation were about to collapse into something much darker. And it would start, as too many violent stories begin, with someone answering a door. On the evening of June 21, 1986, in Black River Bridge, New Brunswick, John and Mary Glendinning, an elderly couple known for generosity, were running their small convenience store. It was the type of place where a candy jar lived permanently beside the register, and trust was the currency. That night, the trust finally broke. The power went out, cut deliberately, and then Ledger and two young accomplices, Todd Matchett and Scott Curtis, forced their way in. What was intended as a quick robbery shifted in an instant. When the Glendinnings confronted them, things turned savage. Inside the darkened shop, the trio unleashed harm that stunned even seasoned investigators. John was beaten so badly he couldn't stand. Mary was dragged, attacked, and sexually assaulted. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about domination, about wiping out the goodness that people like them embodied. When the violence stopped, the three ran. They left John dead on the floor and Mary clinging to life, bleeding and broken. She crawled to the phone and dialed 911, and the dispatcher stayed with her until help reached her door. Officers walked into devastation, but they also found a witness determined to survive. The investigation moved quickly. Within days, all three suspects were arrested. Under the pressure, Todd Matchett pleaded guilty to murder and assault. Curtis and Ledger denied involvement, but the evidence was a wall. Witnesses, physical traces, and the cross-checking of their stories put Alan Ledger not just there, but at the center, instigator, leader, the one who made decisions about who lived and who did not. Despite her injuries, Mary Glendinning stood up in court and testified. She told the quiet room how her husband's last moments were spent trying to protect her. It cut through everybody present. A reminder that courage can hold even against the worst people can do to one another. When the verdict came down, Ledger showed nothing. He was sentenced to life in prison. For most, that would be the last page. For him, prison wasn't an end. It was a waiting room. Inside, he played a part. Guards described him as a model prisoner. He followed policies, kept to himself, never caused visible trouble. But that calm was a mask. Underneath, he tracked patterns, memorized routines, studied how the system moved. He treated the facility as another locked house. And like every other, he intended to find its weakness. By 1989, he had been behind bars for 3 years at the Atlantic Institution, a maximum security penitentiary in Rennes-Corryville. He kept playing the role of the quiet, courteous inmate. In the spring, he began complaining about a severe ear infection. His performance was convincing, patient, polite, unflappable. Medical staff arranged for transport to the Duriel-Dumont Regional Hospital in Monton for treatment. On May 3rd, 2 correctional officers drove him in a secured vehicle, shackled and handcuffed. Outwardly, he complied. What they didn't know was that he had spent weeks preparing. Hidden inside his body was a sharpened piece of metal snapped from a television antenna, wrapped and concealed. He had turned his body into both weapon and lockpick. At the hospital, he asked to use the washroom. Ordinary request. The officers permitted it. In that tiled room, he removed the metal from its hiding place and worked at the lock on his cuffs. Within seconds, the cuffs dropped. He undid the restraints on his legs, steadied his breathing, and braced himself. When the door opened, he lunged. The metal rod in his hand looked and functioned like a blade. The guards, unarmed except for Terrace, didn't anticipate the ambush. He sprayed them, shoved through, and ran. He blasted down hospital corridors and slipped out the front doors into the parking lot before anyone registered what was happening. The first car he reached belonged to Peggy Olive, an outpatient who had just arrived. He opened the door and forced her aside. He said he was being held for murder, she would later recall. He pressed something to her throat and ordered her to drive. She believed she was about to die. Then, just as abruptly as he had seized control, he shifted. He talked quietly, almost soothingly, promised she wouldn't be hurt. Without warning, he ended it. When he let me go, Peggy said, "He told me he wouldn't harm my car either." It was a chilling kind of evil, able to whisper reassurance while steering toward the next violent act. He abandoned the car and dissolved into the city. He had no money, no food, no plan beyond a single pull in his head: go home. By the time the full picture reached authorities, he was already gone. That night, the largest manhunt in New Brunswick's history began. Roadblocks went up. Warnings went out. It made no difference. He was on his way back to Miramichi, back to the place where he had been sentenced. In the months ahead, he would make sure no one forgot him. People assumed that an escapee would run far, hide deep, but they didn't know him. For Ledger, this was personal. Home is where he headed. By the end of May 1989, whispers crept through town. Break-ins that didn't look like ordinary theft, noises in the trees, flickers of movement at night. Then came the first blaze. On May 29th, the home of 75-year-old Annie Fleem ignited. Neighbors rushed toward it, but the fire swallowed the structure too quickly. Annie's sister-in-law, Nina Flem, barely made it out, covered in burns. At the hospital, hanging between life and death, she managed to say 5 words that changed the investigation. "He tied me to the bed." The fire wasn't an accident. An intruder had demanded money and exploded with violence when the women resisted. Annie was beaten, sexually assaulted, and strangled, and then the house was set alight. The scene was so brutal that hardened detectives struggled to process what they were seeing. From what was left, a story emerged. Nina remembered a metal chain around her attacker's waist, the kind used to restrain prisoners. That was the first clean clue linking the violence to a very specific escaped convict. Overnight, the atmosphere shifted. Doors that had never known a lock were barricaded. People tucked guns beside their beds. Children were kept inside. Law enforcement established checkpoints, and officers started patrolling in pairs. But Ledger stayed ahead. He knew the back routes, the woodlots, the hidden paths, the places where the map went quiet. He moved as if he blended into the land itself, and days rolled into weeks, weeks into months. Sightings came in by the dozens, unconfirmed, untraceable. Then in October, the nightmare rekindled. On the night of October 13th, 1989, flames rose again, this time from the home of Linda and Donna Donnie, sisters who shared a house in Newcastle. Police arrived to a structure fully involved, and once inside, to a sight that froze the blood. Both women were dead. They had been beaten, sexually assaulted, and strangled before the fire took hold. The level of violence was focused, calculated, personal. Investigators said it looked like whoever did it had taken their time. Forensics extracted DNA traces from the scene. It was a new science barely finding its legal footing, but the profile that emerged later matched what everyone feared. The genetic markers pointed to Alan Ledger. Panic spread faster than official updates could counter. People said they saw him by the river. Others swore they heard him outside their windows. Businesses closed early. Streets emptied at dusk. Gun shops ran out of stock. Police fielded hundreds of calls from terrified residents. It wasn't just that a fugitive was out there. It was that a legend of harm had taken shape around him, a specter that could be anywhere and nowhere at once. Then came the moment that tore into the town's core. On the night of November 16, 1989, the last safeguard, faith itself, was targeted. Father James Smith, a local priest known for patience and generosity, didn't show up for a prayer meeting. Parishioners went to check on him. What they found stopped them cold. Inside his rectory, Father Smith had been brutally beaten and mutilated. His neck slashed, his chest opened, his jaw broken. The act looked like torture. In a small Catholic community, killing a priest is more than a murder. It felt like an assault on belief. By then, fear dominated everything. People slept in shifts. Some simply left. Even police admitted they felt like they were chasing a shadow. It was like we were hunting a ghost, one officer said later. He didn't have to call the station or leave notes. The silence after each attack was a taunt in itself. He moved through the woods and fed on the panic he caused. For 201 days, he tightened his grip on the entire region. By late November, half a year had bled away. 4 dead. No known hideout. Patrol cars crawled the back roads. The Crime Stoppers reward climbed to $50,000. Despite the tips and the sightings and the suppose you saw hims, he stayed invisible. Then, on November 23, 1989, in Saint, John, he moved again, not to kill, but to flee. He hijacked a taxi at gunpoint, forcing the driver, Ron Gonk, to head toward Monton through snow and ice. The drive turned treacherous, and Gonk lost control, sliding into a snowbank. Ledger flagged down another vehicle. The driver this time was Michelle Mercer, an off-duty RCMP constable. Suddenly there were two hostages, and he ordered Mercer to keep driving. But in the White House, she lost her way and eventually pulled off for fuel near Sussex, New Brunswick. That moment cracked the sequence. Mercer and Gonk escaped and sounded the alarm. Still scrambling to get out, Ledger hijacked a transport truck next, ordering its driver, Brian Golding, to take him to Monton. By then, Mercer had reached an emergency telephone. RCMP roadblocks snapped into place across the province. The morning of 24th November, officers spotted the truck near Newcastle. Surrounded and out of options, Alan Ligger surrendered without a fight. After 201 days of fear, he was back in custody, and the largest manhunt in New Brunswick's history had run its course. There was a dark irony to it. Had he served his first sentence without escaping, he might have had a path to parole. By breaking out and slaughtering his way through the province, he essentially guaranteed he would die behind bars. Word of his capture spread through the Miramichi like sun cutting through fog. People filled the streets. Relief sounded like holiday cheer, as though Christmas had arrived early. They could breathe again. He was returned to custody, this time under conditions that left no room for loopholes, no hospital trips, no softness, no chance. Even so, along with relief came disbelief. After months of living under siege, residents found it hard to accept that the figure who once seemed omnipresent was truly confined. The nightmare had ended, but it hadn't left quietly. The damage would take longer to heal. After his capture, he was moved to Fredericton and held in a downtown jail during his court proceedings. Inside the courtroom, something unfolded that would become a legal milestone. In August 1990, Ledger was convicted for charges related to his escape from the Atlantic Institution and received an additional 9 years. But the trial that mattered most, what would cement his place in legal history, began that November. This was the first time in Canada that DNA profiling would be used not to clear someone, but to convict. It was a newborn technology in legal terms, delicate, unfamiliar, more theory than practice to many. But in this case, the evidence spoke clearly. Scientists compared genetic samples from the murder investigations, the traces on burned clothing, material under fingernails, fragments of wood from burned structures. Each time, the result pointed toward one man. The odds of a mistake were calculated at 1 in 9 million. The prosecution described Ligier as a predator who had turned Miramichi into a hunting ground. Witnesses drew a portrait of a person who could sit with a calm, calculating intelligence and then snap into uncontrollable violence. Among them was Nina Flem, the sole living victim from his 201-day reign. Fragile and frightened yet steady, she told the court what she remembered. Being tied down, the smell of smoke, the sound of him leaving as the flames began to spread. The entire room went still. Even hardened reporters hesitated as they wrote. Ligier sat emotionless, as if listening to someone else's biography. When the verdict arrived, he didn't react. On November 3, 1991, the court found Alan Joseph Ledger guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder. He received life in prison without the possibility of parole for 25 years. Later, forensic experts would call the case a turning point in Canadian criminal justice, the moment when DNA showed its strength not only to free the innocent, but to reveal the guilty. After the trial, the old jail that had held him shut down. Years later, it was converted into a science museum. Behind the glass, an installation on DNA profiling stands, a nod to the science that secured the conviction of the monster of the Miramichi. For the families, justice had finally landed. For those who lived through it, the soundtrack of that time never completely quieted. The fires, the screams, the knocks that made people freeze before they reached the door. The name Alan Ligger became a shorthand for fear, a reminder of what can happen when rage, control, and lack of conscience align. After the sentencing, he was transferred to one of the country's most secure facilities and spent years inside the super maximum security unit in Saint and Des Plaines, Quebec, a place designed for the most dangerous offenders in Canada. There were no chances left, no hospital runs, no minor oversight to exploit, no gap to squeeze through. The man who once hid in forests now lived inside concrete and steel. He continued to serve his sentence the same way he had once fooled guards, quietly, composed, following program guidelines and keeping apart. Those who knew his history said he wasn't rehabilitated, he was contained. In 2015, the Correctional Service of Canada transferred him to the Edmonton Institution in Alberta, another high-security facility built for violent offenders. Officials gave only the typical explanation: inmate relocation for management purposes. For the people whose lives were shaped by his months of terror, geography didn't matter. What mattered was that the cell door remained bolted. Even decades later, his name could pull tension into a room. In August 2020, after more than 30 years locked up, Alan Lear applied for day parole. News tore through New Brunswick and ripped open old wounds that had scabbed but never healed. On January 13, 2021, the Parole Board of Canada reviewed the application. After hearing statements from victims' families and weighing psychological evaluations, the board denied the request. They concluded that Ledger still presented a high risk to the public and did not demonstrate genuine remorse. For the people of the Miramichi, the decision confirmed what they had long believed: some monsters should never walk free. Today, the town has rebuilt in the most important ways. The doors that were bolted shut in fear stand open again. The river moves as steadily as ever. Trees still line the edges of quiet roads, and children play in places once held in anxious silence. But when residents talk about that stretch of time, their voices still drop. They remember the smell of smoke that seemed to settle over everything. They remember headlines that shifted like weather. They remember the sense that something evil moved just beyond the tree line, never properly outlined, yet always present. The Ledger case permanently altered how violent crime is investigated in Canada. It marked the first time DNA evidence secured a conviction, setting a precedent that would shape forensic science and courtroom expectations for decades. Helen Ledger will likely die in prison. But the question left behind doesn't fade. Criminologists ask it, psychologists ask it, so do ordinary people sitting around kitchen tables when the conversation turns serious. Was he born to kill, or did the world carve him into what he became? Some argue that the ingredients that fed him, poverty, shame, instability, a household without safety, explained what followed. Others insist something in him was darker than circumstance, something that wouldn't have been diverted by a different childhood. The outcome is the same: 4 innocent lives stolen, a community scarred, and a name that will echo through Canadian criminal history. Alan Joseph Ledger, the monster of the Miramichi. If you found this story compelling, please like and subscribe for more videos like this. We share new true crime documentaries every week, exploring the cases that force us to confront the hardest question of all: are criminals born, or are they made? Ultimately, the decision made clear that Ledger still presented a high risk to the public and did not demonstrate genuine remorse. For the people of the Miramichi, that conclusion simply confirmed what they had long believed: some monsters should never walk free. Today, the town has rebuilt in the most important ways, slowly and with intention. The doors that were bolted shut in fear stand open again, as if testing the air. The river moves as steadily as ever, unbothered and constant. Trees still line the edges of quiet roads, and children play in places once held in anxious silence, their voices filling spaces that were once empty. And yet, when residents talk about that stretch of time, their voices still drop, as if acknowledging something that never fully left. They remember the smell of smoke that seemed to settle over everything, clinging to memory as much as to clothes. They remember headlines that shifted like weather, changing tone as quickly as the wind. They remember the sense that something evil moved just beyond the tree line, never properly outlined yet always present, always felt more than seen. The Ledger case permanently altered how violent crime is investigated in Canada, and that change has not faded. It marked the first time DNA evidence secured a conviction, setting a precedent that would shape forensic science and courtroom expectations for decades, establishing a new standard for what proof could be. Helen Ledger will likely die in prison, but the question left behind doesn't fade. no matter how much time passes. Criminologists ask it. Psychologists ask it. So do ordinary people sitting around kitchen tables when the conversation turns serious. Was he born to kill, or did the world carve him into what he became? Some argue that the ingredients that fed him, poverty, shame, instability, a household without safety, explained what followed, a grim recipe that led to an inevitable end. Others insist something in him was darker than circumstance, something that wouldn't have been diverted by a different childhood, a force that would have found its way no matter the path. Either way, the outcome is the same. 4 innocent lives stolen, a community scarred, and a name that will echo through Canadian criminal history. Alan Joseph Ledger, the monster of the Miramichi. If you found this story compelling, please like and subscribe for more videos like this. We share new true crime documentaries every week, exploring the cases that force us to confront the hardest question of all. Are criminals born, or are they made?